salt.
Ah, yes.
They're like, you stole my gold.
Like, where's all the gold? You got paper now.
Yeah.
Dragons find their way to Fort Knox.
Yeah. Well, Ragnarok was real, and there's the world dragon. It's coming in. So,
I
okay.
knew it.
There goes the world snake.
world
Yeah, the
serpent.
world snake.
Greetings and always again.
All right. So,
Thor and Odin lay it down. So, okay, where's the giant wolf?
actually, Odinism is actually on the rise. More and more people claim it as their religion these days.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of like a thing.
Like, honestly,
It's Norse mythology, but the thing is, we don't really know much about how it's actually practiced, kind of like Celtic religions, because most of them were like pre-literate, so they couldn't write down their beliefs anyways. It's not like they had a Bible or anything. A lot of it was like stories that were passed down by bards
Yeah,
and
I'm actually
skalds and
Odinist.
stuff. Well, a hot dog day. All right, Odinist. Hey, so it is March the 17th, and today we are going over the last portion of the early Republic. Please keep in mind, we're going to have a test Monday over the early Republic. Wednesday, we will have another lecture, but that's on the next unit. Friday's lecture will not have to do with this test, so keep that in mind. All right. So we ended off last time. We were talking about the War of 1812. The army stunk. They tried to invade Canada, and the Canadians were pretty successful. We were disorganized militias that like headstrong guys that didn't want to listen to orders, totally unprepared. Timing was off on the attacks. Pretty good at attacking like tribal Indians who were not ready for us and stuff like that. But otherwise, the Navy, however, very successful. So moving on from there, terrible transitions. All right, so War of 1812 continued. Meanwhile, and this is where it's really successful, Andrew Jackson, known as Old Hickory, led 25,000 Tennessee militiamen and defeated Creek Indians in the Mississippi region. So once again, these were Indians who were allied with the British. And Andrew Jackson was known very much for, he was a complicated character because he didn't really care about Indians, but he was friends with some of the tribes. But some of the tribes he hated bitterly. Unfortunately for us, on March 31st, 1814, the British defeated Napoleon and led to its full might against the United States. So Napoleon's defeated. No, he'll come back for a little bit. They'll knock him down. And a lot of his defeat had to do with, of course, same problem Hitler had. He invaded Russia, and then a historical winter hit them and froze and killed the cream of the Grande Armée, the great French army that conquered almost all of Europe.
We love invading.
So, yeah. Like, why pick the winter? Why do that?
Why pick the winter and why pick Russia?
Yeah. Well.
Nothing there.
A lot of the reason why he picked Russia was because of his ego. Kind of like Hitler. A lot of it was, it wasn't so much paranoia, I don't think, with Napoleon as it was ego. It was Hitler, it was more paranoia than anything. In any case, yeah, he's going to be put under house arrest, and then he'll eventually escape and rally again, but we'll get to that later. By August 1814, the newly bolstered British sent 20 warships toward Washington, D.C. So they had the biggest, most powerfulest military in the world, and it no longer had to focus on the other biggest, most powerfulest military. So guess what? We're having problems with our ex-colonials, the U.S. So they were able to put all of that down on us, and it got real. The U.S. troops held them off long enough for our government to escape. However, the British troops burned down our Capitol building. So Madison and all of our federal government had to flee. He wasn't there at that time, actually, but his wife was, and thanks to her, she actually saved a lot of the artwork and some of the historical documents that were in the Capitol building before the British burned it. So, seeing this event from his cell in a British warship, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem that would later become our national anthem. So, Francis Scott Key. So they had him down in the brig, then he had a window, and the story goes he could see the cannon fire when they're trying to hold off the British as long as they can. And that's going to go down, be popularized into a very hard to sing song. When I was in basic training in the Army, we had to sing that every night, and it sounded terrible. Like right before lights out, we just had to sing it from our bunks. It was all off key. All right, let's go to the next one, kids. All right, so, not going too well, but that's okay. At first, the British refused our peace offers. We're like, oh gosh, we bit off more than we could chew. However, the British were becoming war weary and overtaxed because they fought France so long. And yet they were like tired of it. Kind of like how we were tired of the Vietnam War, right? So the Treaty of Ghent ended the war on December the 24th, 1814. This treaty only restored diplomatic relations and addressed none of the problems that led to the war. So, once again, peace treaty, kind of like if you remember the last one we had that ended the American Revolution, and made some promises that didn't fulfill. This one just went back to the status quo, back to that. It didn't fix any of the problems. But information was pretty slow. Not everybody knew that peace was had. Kind of like at the end of the Civil War, the last people to die in the Civil War would actually be I think a couple of months after the peace treaty. So, after peace was had. There wasn't actually a treaty because the Confederate government was dissolved. After defeating the Creeks, Andrew Jackson led his men down to New Orleans. Remember, we just newly acquired this. Then he hastened to build defenses because the British were coming to attack there. Neither side got the message that the war was over. Andrew Jackson then had freed blacks create an army unit. Also, he enlisted the aid of river pirates, which was a really big thing up and down the Mississippi River back then, led by Jean Lafitte. And they were given pardons for joining him in the fight. They got cannons ready as well. When the British attacked, their General Edward Pakenham was cut in half by a cannonball. The British lost 2,000 troops to the Americans, 71. Ironically, this victory came after the war was officially over. And Andrew Jackson was pretty smart, too. He wasn't going to do something stupid like have all these guys stand up in columns like in Napoleonic tactics we'll use in the Civil War. He had them hide behind berms of earth that would take the shots for them, and they fired from behind cover and concealment. Pretty smart thing. It worked out in the American Revolution in guerrilla warfare. And it worked out here too. So while the British were just marching forward in these nice, neat columns, the American forces were fighting dirty, hiding from the bullets, but shooting them from behind. So it worked out pretty well. And you can see the British lost disastrously. And this would help propel Andrew Jackson to be very famous, very popular. And he's going to do other things as well. It's going to have a lot of common Americans think he's a pretty cool guy. Yeah, 2000 to 71, that's very, very lopsided. That's why did you show up? You should have stayed home.
I mean, in war, do whatever you can to survive from hiding behind something.
And that makes sense, yeah, because it was innovative. It might have seemed cowardly to the enemy, but you won.
They lost a lot less people. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we're going to have the American Civil War really ingrained in us. But also we're going to like Europe's going to watch our Civil War and learn from us, especially the Germans. The Germans are going to learn a lot because they're going to send a lot of dignitaries and generals to actually watch our battles. And then they are going to take those tactics back home and just be like, you know what? We saw what didn't work in the American Civil War, so they're going to institute a lot of what we call modern warfare fighting with rifle, cartridge muskets that are easier to reload, they're going to fight undercover concealment stuff, like get on the ground instead of standing up to get shot and stuff. And they're going to totally wipe out the French in lopsided battles in the Franco-Prussian War. Then, I think it was World War II. They're like the Russians are very innovative with modern infantry fighting. They're also going to come up with what we call not cover and move, but it's like cover and move's how you like a term for it, but it's essentially like bounding warfare. Like we're going to shoot at the enemy to keep their heads down while you move, and then you shoot at the enemies to keep their heads down so we can move. Or essentially, you kind of scare people to not shoot at you, so you can have like do flanking maneuvers or press forward or whatever. Gosh, cover and concept. No, it's cover and move, but I don't remember like technical word for it. So yeah, so people are always trying to figure out new ways to kill each other.
Facts. They are.
All right, but don't worry, maybe machines can figure that out for us one day.
Economic advantages of war. Thanks, Skynet. British blockades during the war interrupted foreign trade. Americans then had to rely on U.S. manufactured goods now. So, so first off, this started with Jefferson. He was like, we're not trading with anybody anymore because we don't want to make you mad at us. And though that killed a lot of jobs and caused a horrible economic depression for those who relied on the capitalist economy, like trading with foreign trade stuff, it would help with a lot of these cottage industries at home start filling in the gaps. And the same with this war. We couldn't do our foreign trade, but there's still a demand for products, a demand for goods. And, where there's a vacuum, people try to fill the void. U.S. manufacturing expanded, as did cotton production industry. Now, of course, the cotton production industry is also going to expand due to the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney. And that is going to very effectively, very easily remove all these little tiny seeds from the cotton so that it's able to easily be spun into cloth and string. And so cotton had been around for a very long time, especially in India, but it's very labor intensive, like picking the seeds out by hand so that you can weave it. But the cotton gin could do it with simply the turn of a crank. Tariffs placed on imported goods increased the demand for U.S.-made goods. So when the federal government first formed, after the signing of the Constitution, tariffs were seen as the main way we could perhaps fund the federal government. Now, they weren't going to use the federal government for much other than keeping some small military forces and like running the mail. But tariffs do dissuade foreign countries to trade with us. But going back to cotton, we're going to talk about that a lot more later, because cotton, because it's so easy to grow and the economic efficiency, at least perceived, of using slave labor, that will be debated later. It's going to have a lot of people think that cotton is how you get rich quick. Since we survived the war, we gained international respect. So we were little fish, biggest, most powerfulest military in the world, decided to have peace with us and call it good. And then we humiliated them in New Orleans. We are going to have military reforms to improve the Army, to make it more professional. We don't want to be humiliated like in Canada again. And gained less dependence on Britain. We've learned that we can survive without having all their manufactured goods. We can start making this junk ourselves. Had a good long period of having a terrible economy, but we pulled through. All right, so this is going to be the last president of the early republic, James Monroe, and he's going. The era where he's president is going to be known as the era of good feeling. So it's going to be a period of relative peace. The economy is doing a lot better. It's going to rebound very well after the end of the war. And a few other things. So following the War of 1812, Madison became very popular. We survived the war. Things were doing better. Political enemies such as DeWitt Clinton, Henry Clay, and John C. Calhoun, who we will hear more about later, suddenly befriended the president. And so John C. Calhoun is going to be famous for us, and so will Henry Clay. But Calhoun is going to be somebody who's really at first into the idea of having a national economy called the American system was the idea, to where our northern states would be hardcore manufacturers like what Hamilton wanted, making finished goods and selling them out throughout the world, while the South could grow the things needed by those manufacturing industries. Therefore, both would do well, and we would be in the international market and help out the domestic market. Later on, however, he's going to have a big conversion of thought, and he's going to be the guy who's going to be the biggest proponent of states' rights right before the Civil War, and also of something that's still around talked about today called nullification. The idea that since it's the states that make up the United States, a state can choose under the 9th and 10th Amendment to ignore federal law. And by doing so, just ignore Congress and the president. It's still done today. Like medical marijuana, and marijuana is like a big one, right? It's federally illegal, but some states have voted to legalize it within their states, even though it's against federal law. Gay marriage was like that too for a while, until the Supreme Court changed it. So he was a big proponent for that, and of course it's going to have to do with later on, like tariffs. So due to old animosity with Alexander Hamilton, the Democratic-Republican Congress did not recharter the Bank of the U.S. Remember, Democratic Republicans were Jeffersonians, Madisonians, and they were pro-farmers. Farmers did not trust the banks because they saw banks as those who manipulated currency to help them out, and would also do things like use shady practices with interest rates and loans in order to seize your property. Probably a legitimate concern. Instead, in 1816, Calhoun introduced legislation for the Second Bank of the U.S., which was just like the first. And this is going to open 1st January 1817. So to us, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but because we kind of take that for granted today, right? So unless you're like, unless you're like there are some people who are concerned with like the Federal Reserve, which has fulfilled that point because they do currency manipulation and also interest rate manipulation and stuff. But this was a big concern because people saw this as a way to kind of like make the poor poorer and the rich richer. But people who were on the side of it were like, well, this makes our currency more stable and it makes us more recognizable internationally, and it gives us better ways to start new businesses with loans. So in the election of 1816, Madison chose to support his successor. He already had 2 terms, he wasn't going to do 3 and outshine Washington. He chose James Monroe. Monroe would then win 184 electoral votes to the Federalist Rufus King's 34. So, sorry, Federalist.
Wow.
Yeah, not so good.
Big.
Well, the Democratic Republicans were the popular movement. People were coming to America to become farmers. And this was the Farmers' Party for small farmers and for the growing class of plantation owners. So the Federalist, however, was more of like, you had more of a northern coastal town thing. And especially after what we saw as the success of the war and rebounding colonies, we were like, well, maybe we don't need that Federalist baggage. Maybe these are the guys to go with. All right. Following the war, infrastructure. So infrastructure, of course, when we talk about that, we're talking about means to keep the nation together, especially for economy these can be things that translate into defense, like infrastructure. Like for example, roads. Roads are important for commerce, for travel, but a road can also be used for defense, so that soldiers can travel and things like that to where they're needed. Because travel and shipping was such a massive problem in the United States, we didn't have a lot of roads, especially good roads. Washed out, they're dirt. And the rougher a road is, the harder it is for your pack animals or your wagons to make it through. That ups the cost of shipping goods. It's not good for any business. Calhoun convinced Madison that only the federal government could make substantial improvements. So Madison, like Jefferson, was a strict constitutionalist. It's like, if the Constitution does not give us power to do something, we shouldn't do it. Calhoun was like, look, the states can't do this. They can't do it. We need something bigger than that to make roads that go from one state to another, right? So the Cumberland Road was built from Maryland to Virginia, and that would be our first national road, and that would set a precedent for other national roads. Meanwhile, New York's Governor Clinton led his state to build more than 350-mile Erie Canal linking the Hudson River to the Lake Erie. And that's going to really help out with the development of places like Illinois and Michigan and stuff like that. So they're going to have access to the Great Lakes. And go all the way to the coast. Henry M. Shreve began to develop the steamboat during this time as well, and made his first successful passage to New Orleans in 1816. So shipping by water was the cheapest way to do it. It took a lot of feed to get animals to go long distances. Roads weren't good. Still had Indian attacks or hits. It was dangerous. Something broke down, you'd have to figure out a way to fix it. But going up and down rivers, like the Mississippi River, you could sail. So the river, of course, goes from north to south. So people would often make barges and put the things they want to ship and sail down the river. Pretty easy. You're going with the current. However, going back up wasn't that feasible. So a lot of times when you sold your goods at New Orleans and put them on a boat, you broke down the barge and just sold the wood. And then you got on a road and walked or rode a horse all the way back up north again. So a steamboat can go both ways. You don't have to break down your boat. It's going to be a lot more efficient and fast. You have north and south traffic. So Supreme Court's going to start cutting teeth a little more during this period as well. You have a Supreme Court case of Gibbons versus Ogden in 1824. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that Congress had complete authority in matters of interstate commerce. And so, if memory serves, this had to do with a merchant was complaining about having to pay taxes in multiple states for transporting his goods. And here, they said that, and this has to do with the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, that whenever you have cross-state commerce, Congress gets to make the rules. States make the rules on what happens within their states, but Congress makes the rules that go from state to state. The 13 colonies and during the Articles of Confederation, when we first had the Confederation states, had a big problem with states taxing each other, having coin that would trade with each other, all that stuff. And we didn't want to go back to that. He's not missing out much. I think we're almost done. Let me check. Okay, yeah. So yeah, there's really just a couple of big things that happen. One is going to be the Monroe Doctrine. The other is going to be, we kind of invade Florida, literally. In 1817, the Rush-Bagot Agreement in Britain and the U.S. agreed to demilitarize the Great Lakes. Remember, that was a big problem in the War of 1812. We were kind of fighting on the lakes. And they're like border bodies of water. So we're like, okay, we'll get rid of all of our boats of war out of these things. We'll just let it be a place of trade and common ownership. Convention of 1818, we agreed to honor fishing rights in the Atlantic. That was a big thing. You got to remember a lot of some of our colonies, like all the way up in Maine and stuff like that, that was the only way a lot of people made their money was by fishing in the Atlantic, getting a bunch of that cod, and then they would salt it so it would preserve, and then they'd go sell it to England. Recognized boundaries in Louisiana Territory. That's good. Remember, we got all that stuff from Napoleon. And to occupy the Oregon Territory jointly. And so by doing so, we agreed that we would keep military forces out of it and we wouldn't promote people to go colonize there. But it wasn't a settled issue. Like there weren't, like we couldn't decide what the laws would be there, what to do with the people who did live there and things like that. We'll get to how that's settled later. And you can thank the Methodists for that. Florida remained in the hands of Spain. However, the Spanish had allowed the area to be inhabited by pirates who preyed on American vessels. So, Florida, if you remember way back when we were talking about exploration, was still under that. Andrew Jackson would request to personally lead troops into the region and take it for America, conquest. The then Secretary of War, Calhoun, authorized him to patrol the border and just prevent trespassing. So he's like, oh, go be border patrol, wink, wink. Don't do anything pesky. Well, he's going to get pesky.
Wow. Who would have guessed?
Oh, yeah. But it's going to make him even more popular. Really, he's going to commit international, what we would call today international war crimes. Without the permission of your government, you led an army to invade another country's territory. But he got away with it.
War crime.
Yeah, that's like, if you get away with invade, did you want me to go back?
Yes.
Yeah, invasion really stinks. But if you win, then I guess it doesn't stink as bad for you.
The victors would decide history books.
Really, it was the Indians there that lost the most. There wasn't that many Spanish there. I think it was just like a small fort or two. They're just holding on to it. At this time, the Spanish Empire was crumbling pretty hard. They held on to territories, but once a lot of the silver and the gold mines dried up, and especially after Napoleon defeated and conquered Spain, kicked their king out of the country, and now he just came back home, Spain was really on the decline. No longer were they like in charge of half the known world under the Holy Roman Empire, or like Charles V or Philip II. Like those days were done going.
Okay.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, that's the last one here. Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah. So invasion of Florida and Monroe Doctrine. Cool. All right. So last one for our unit. Jackson, however, led his men across the Spanish border into Florida, forcing the Spanish there to leave Cuba. Yeah, they were completely out of band. It's kind of like in Texas history. When we talk about Texas, the Spanish in Texas, pretty disorganized, and a lot of the people who were there didn't really want to be there. It was like the outskirts of nowhere. Same for Florida. Jackson claimed he had secret orders to do so from President Monroe, who denied that, but people kind of glossed over it. Recognizing that part. Recognizing that it did not have the military power to hold Florida, Spain chose to cede at the cost of $5 million. So we invaded, then we gave them money. The region to the U.S. In the Adams-Onis Treaty, of course, I think it's John Quincy Adams, and he met with this essentially Secretary of State Onis in 1819. The treaty was named after, it says right there. I should have read it. In November of 1823, the president, it's President Monroe, made a statement outlining the Monroe Doctrine, declaring the Americas, that's North, South, Meso, Caribbean, all that, was closed to European colonization. This established our foreign policy ever since. Even through the Cold War, we would harken back to this. Now, we couldn't do anything about it. It seemed like an empty statement. But after essentially kicking Spain out of Florida, we're like, yeah, no one in Europe should rule these lands over here. It should be to the local people, is what he was putting out. And it will be brought up again. Remember, in the Spanish-American War, when we were fighting in Cuba and the Philippines and all that. And of course, part of it as well, like it'll help us lead to support other like throwing out of like the Russian influence and stuff like that later on, like in the Cold War, trying to say, hey, you can't force these people to be communists, even though a lot of them want to be communists. A lot of them want to be capitalists too. And we still have that problem today in a lot of South America. Or you still have very, very polarized opinions on where their countries should go. And sometimes it gets violent. Not like Colombia. They had the FARC guerrillas for a long time. They were totally pro-communist. And when it wasn't working out for them, they turned into like a giant militarized drug cartel. So that lasted for a long time.
I'm also a giant militarized.
Well, I mean, I guess you could say all drug cartels are militarized. But they were like guerrilla fighters. They had the ideology behind them too. All right. All right, folks. So that's going to end it for this unit. I'll come back and lecture Friday, but it's not going to be on the test, not this test.
I'm betting we'll get
So
you winning.
make sure you study test Monday.
Is it really worth it?
Yeah.